In a recent article on Moroccan cultural studies, that came out a few days ago. So I explored the beginnings and ends of cultural studies by a group of Moroccan scholars in Fez, including myself in the early 1990s, following the US invasion of Iraq. I argued that Ngugi wa Thiong'o's suggestions in his essay on the abolition of the English department have been his suggestions have been so crucial and influential to the professors in the Department of English. Wa Thiong'o stresses the question of the role of an English department in an African situation and environment. This inspired us to capitalize on the fact that ours is not an English department, but a department of English in Morocco. And for me, that's of great importance. So it's a department of English in Morocco, the Maghreb, Africa, and in the Arab world. He points out that the English department is informed by a single culture and a pedagogical transmission of the English tradition and the modern Western consciousness and cultural heritage. For him, if there is a need for a study of the historic continuity of a single culture, why can't this be African? Why can't African literature be at the center so that we can view other cultures in relationship to it? He calls upon the reorientations of the department to place Kenya and Africa, and in our case Morocco, the Maghreb and Africa in the center, and that all other things are to be considered in their relevance to our situation and their contribution towards understanding ourselves. The pedagogical and political ground-up approach of Thiong'o that is reminiscent of the Subaltern Studies group, of the Subaltern Studies group's history from below or culture from below, led him to espouse a radical attitude, insisting that the English department be abolished. While we did not adopt the same radical position, we departed from Wa Thiong'o's suggestions to rethink the status of our department. I shall use Edward Said's notion of traveling theory. I used Edward Said's theory of traveling theory, but also Mohamed Abid al-Jabri's notion of tabi'a. The context is of great importance in the English department. It is it is, for example, impossible to understand the academic and pedagogical task of the Department of English in Morocco outside of the Arab Islamic heritage within the frames of both Pan-Arabism, Pan-Islamism, colonialism, post-colonialism, Amazirism, and the sub-Saharan African influences. One of the major impacts of the strategic act is the significant transformations in the educational process in the Department of English in Fez, and then probably throughout Morocco. The curricula dramatically changed to incorporate the diversified constructions of cultural identity and ethnicity in Morocco, highlighting issues of gender, identity, language, religion, and race in the context of Morocco, Africa, and the Arab world. A de-Westernizing and disorienting policy informed the post-1991 curricula, where Morocco is held of central importance. I'm not going to go through the courses, but one of the main courses that I started in Hal Mehraz is Moroccan philosophy, teaching Moroccan philosophy as part of the, of course, boosting critical thinking, but also decentering academia and pedagogy. And so in the following minutes, if I still have time, I will say a few things about the Moroccan philosophers, Moroccan philosophy, as I've been teaching it at the Department of English. So Moroccan philosophers' engagement with European thought and modernity is rather complex, diversified, and even at times contradictory. At one extreme of the Moroccan intellectual spectrum stands Ta Abdul Rahman, and at the other extreme stands Abdullah Al-Arwi through Muhammad Abid Al-Jabri. In this presentation, I argue that the three paradigm encounters help us rethink the Moroccan intellectual landscape outside of the totalizing and homogenizing orientations that permeate a considerable number of biased, Eurocentric, and Arab-centric romanticizing writings. If I have time, I will say a few things about some of the things that Professor Tariq has been talking about, especially Abdul Kabir Khatibi. But so Ta Abdul Rahman's work indicates a serious departure, both meanings, departure meaning departing, starting from, but departing, going away from, or leaving behind the Western intellectual and ideological pathways and terminology based on modernity, secularism, citizenship, the state, and democracy. He argues that the Muslim intellectuals of the Nahda, such as Muhammad Abdu, and thinkers such as Muhammad Abid Al-Jabri, Muhammad Arkoun, and Nasr Hamid Abu Zaid, for example, while attempting to decolonize and retrieve Muslim thought, were anchored in narratives of nationalism, Marxism, secularism, liberalism, and political Islamism. Rather than promoting a total adoption of modernity and rejection of the past, Muhammad Abid Al-Jabri's philosophical project is premised on the necessity to reconcile the rational model of thought with tradition by developing a model that revives and examines Arab-Muslim tradition in the lens of modernist methods and vision, allowing us to embrace global progress. Conversely, Abdullah Al-Arwi opts for an epistemological break with the Arab-Muslim tradition and an unapologetic embrace of modernist European values like enlightenment, modernity, democracy, and historicism as human universal values. Whether you agree with him or not, but this is his very unapologetic about the adoption of Western humanism, and of course he has his own justifications why he thinks we have to embrace Western humanism, enlightenment, as I shall show shortly. It should be stressed from the outset that the contemporary Moroccan philosophical scene is not unified and monolithic. It is riddled through and through with controversy and debate. I will, because of time, I will go very briefly to look at Al-Arwi's work. Al-Arwi's work is premised on the argument that the West is unavoidable in the historical trajectory of the Arabs. The relation between Europe and the Arabs is less one of polarization than one of intersectionality and connectivity. He advocates a historicist and universalist paradigm and departs from the idea that the secret, and probably also the panacea, the secret behind the superiority of Europe over the Arab world is modernity. Arab thought can only thrive and Arab societies can only progress through cross-fertilization and transculturation rather than by espousing a parochial, isolationist policy of self-entrenchment and antagonism with the West. This can be possible, on the one hand, by a call to a decisive epistemological break with the past, what he calls hasm and tajawuz, going beyond, a philosophy promising to surpass the problematic duality between modernity and heritage, and on the other hand, an embracement of European civilization as a common heritage for all humanity. And this is his argument, his justification. For Al-Arwi, Western civilization is the best and most progressive phase humanity has reached at this point of time. and that other civilizations, including Arab Muslim civilization, have contributed to it over history. So it is not an exclusive property of Europe, and its values of liberalism, democracy, enlightenment, modernity, and reason should be made available for all humanity. All humanity contributed to these values, and so it's not a problem if they embrace it, because in the end of the day, it's a human, all humanity participated and contributed to it. Larwi stresses that the Arabs should distinguish between two types of Europe: Europe's colonial tradition based on conquest and military expansion, and Europe as a site of a universal civilizational project resting on humanist values that are useful for all societies, irrespective of their religions, religious, political, historical identity, and economic trajectories and particularities. Joining the universal civilizational project, especially in its Marxist non-imperial form, is the only condition for the Arabs to surpass their historical backwardness and their social and economic miserable situation. It should be stressed here that Larwi shares Marx's statement concerning England's conquest of India, when he was unhappy when India was colonized by England, but later, in the beginning he was unhappy, but later he was so happy because he said, one of the things he said, England is an unconscious tool of history. That since it brought India from the feudalism of the medieval period to another stage of history, capitalism, that is a necessary phase to socialism and later communism. Do I have 1 minute or 1 minute? Anyways, I don't know, but I don't know what I will say in 1 minute. But Larwi's call for European universalist civilization veils a rabid essentialist ideological discourse, since the embracement of European history as human history implies the denial of cultural relativism, difference, pluralism, and particularly criticizing and particularity. Criticizing Larwi, Abdul Kabir Khatibi calls for a de-essentializing position. He rejects totalizing ideological discourses of identity espoused by the champions of tradition and the champions of tradition Turath. Thus, Khatibi's famous call for a double semiotics and double critique as double death, death here implying the birth of difference as the source of new questions and ways of knowing, as Tariq Sabri would tell us. I don't want to go on but in 10 seconds, I would say simply that one of the contributions, the many contributions of Ta Abdul Rahman, is that there is not one modernity. There are modernities, and so we don't have to be slaves to one modernity that we think the only modernity, that's universal modernity. And I would go in, the last word I would use is I would probably use one word that I think is of great importance to the presentation and probably to this today's panel. It's pluriversality. Not pluriversalism, but pluriversality, as of course deacons like Minulo would tell us. But I love it because it doesn't end with an ism, because when it ends with an ism, it's a theory more than a practice. So thank you very much indeed.